So that's kind of where this concept phase comes into play. There's an idea, that something is needed. Okay, and there have been several, I'll admit wholeheartedly that there have been several starts and stops as to where that should go, what that should look like. But as some of the county and city master plans were further identified, there were the alignments of possibly going on the west side and using 1300 South as an east-west connection. So that's still in this concept phase, where we're just assessing the future needs based on the master plan. So come 2017, 2018, there are additional discussions as to what Heber City wants to do with Main Street, and looking at another route, revisiting that. So that's what triggered the planning corridor study that everyone is now familiar with. But I want to point out something that's really important. This is where that corridor planning study falls. There are 3 other major steps that have to happen, or really, these 2 steps before anything's really set in stone. So I'm actually wanting to understand and take courage that we have to take and find out if a corridor is really viable, if it's feasible, if it would carry the traffic and divert that traffic away from Main Street that has been discussed in some of the concept phases. So we have several steps that we still need to go down before anything, before what's called a preferred alignment that's when things are set in stone. That's when things are, we're saying, okay, well, right here is where we need to take and move forward. Oh, I did it again. The nice thing is you got that writing. I apologize, my laptop all of a sudden just decided to do its own thing. Jeremy will be our mouse mover to keep the laptop on screen active. So take heart. We still have a lot of legwork that needs to be done. So as with the corridor planning study, what that does that one verifies if that need is feasible, is a feasible option. And it provides information to the environmental study, which that's where things are. We're doing a on-the-ground, in-depth analysis. That's when we're really looking at things on the ground level. What types of natural environmental impacts? What types of social and economic impacts to the community of potential transportation options? So, just this environmental process is a multi-year process. As we've mentioned, sometimes these studies can take between 3 to 5 years to complete. So, because of the level of analysis that's required, we want to make the right decision. That's really our goal. We want to provide a solution that's going to work, not 10 years into the future or 20 years into the future, but 30 years into the future. When you start going out any further, that's where the crystal ball gets really, really fuzzy, and it's hard to determine. So we're trying to identify a long-term solution. Once that's done, then we can start moving into what's called the design phase. So the environmental phase creates what we call a 30% design. So a preliminary design gives us kind of an idea for corridor preservation and cost analysis, things like that. It's only when we get into the design phase that we start really putting together the plans to build the road. Now, another important point I want to make here, I put this in, says each phase may be contingent upon available funding. So, before we could move into the environmental, our Transportation Commission, we needed to have information from the planning study, so that the Transportation Commission could then say, okay, here's what they're looking at, here's how much we think it's going to cost, here's funding to then start that environmental process. So with that, then we get into design. And so any one of these stages from this point on, really in design and construction, there's no funding to build anything. We have to get the environmental done first to know how much any type of option would cost for any type of future construction. Another important point with the environmental process is we are required by law to look at what's called the no-build alternative. Leaving things as they are. Or maybe making some changes to Main Street. So by law we have a lot of work that we have to do to, one, determine if the alignment that's being recommended in the planning study is the right alignment, or if there's other alignments that would serve that need better. So we have to do a little bit of reevaluation of that and test it before we can move on. So think of this environmental process as a funnel where you have a lot of data at the beginning, and then as we move forward, we're refining, and we're refining until it comes out with a decision. So, and that's one of the things that once our co-worker Brandon Weston, who's our environmental manager, was going to talk through the environmental process. But that's something we can jump to. Jeremy, if you can just click on the next tab. So, just really quick, council members, do you have any questions on this slide?
Along through this process, you're looking at every possible route, every feasible route.
We will take a step back and say, okay, are there other options that need to be looked at?
Because a bit ago you said that the idea of moving 189 over onto 1300 was because somebody had made that suggestion and you looked at it and it penciled out good. Okay, so that's what you said in one of the meetings, or somebody did, that it was because of a suggestion from the public, which you want to hear from. My question is, along through this process, where are we if somebody else has a suggestion of something you ought to look at? I mean, maybe as wild as going back to the east side, but whatever it is, where would they make that suggestion or comment to you for that input?
That's a great segue.
You're saying you want to hear from the public, but when can they do what, which makes a difference?
Well, that's a great segue into this. So this is a really simplified, high-level chart that we put together to kind of describe the various phases of the project. So to your question, that would fall in what's called scoping. So where we're doing this identification, we're looking at things. Again, it's that funnel at the beginning. These are the steps at the beginning of the study. This is what helps set that further analysis that would then be that's more that refining process.
And that's about where you are now?
No. We haven't even started this.
Okay.
Yep. That's why. Jeremy, can you go back to the previous tab?
Okay.
We're still trying to wrap up the planning study here.
So people don't
to move forward into the environmental phase.
My concern is the public they may feel like it, but that they're not even if they have comments, we've already decided, so it's, you know, is the comments going to be taken seriously, and that's where in scoping, and they don't need to be anxious about these steps for a while, because they will have input about various routes in the scoping.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
And then, again, okay, can we jump to the next tab? Jump back to the next tab. So these three orange rectangles, those are, as far as the phase, environmental phase goes, those are the key or required points where the public is required, we're required to go out and let you know, here's what we're looking at. What do you think? You know, what are there some concerns? Are there some things we need to take into consideration? Again, you know, some of this decision, because this is a data-driven process, public comment is one of many factors in that decision-making pie. So we do give it fair consideration, but we also have to balance that with all the other requirements that we have to look at.
But prior to scoping, because of the budget and all those other analysis, you've already kind of put forward a dollar cost number. If somebody,
just for the study.
If somebody come out with a brand new route, you would still apply some dollar cost to it and study it, if it even looks at all.
The study, as part of the cost of the study, that's where that activity would happen.
Okay.
So there's no additional funding that would be required at this point.
But you would cost it out.
Yeah. So Brandon, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I just want to introduce Brandon Lester, because he's really our environmental expert, but he's also UDOT's environmental manager for the department. So he looks at these and reviews these types of documents and processes from a statewide perspective. So I just want to introduce Brandon, and Brandon, if you want to come up and start and kind of walk through some of that environmental process and some of the basic elements.
That'd be helpful.
He's much more well versed than I am.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The environmental process, this, you said takes about 3 to 5 years. Is there any possibility that it would take less than 3? Is that a great possibility? Could it take less than a year? Or would it would have to be around 2.5 or something?
Do you mind? Yeah, thank you. So the question was, could it be less than a year, or is it going to be 5 years?
3 to 5 is kind of the range we were given. Is there a possibility that it would be fewer than 3? And if so, what's the likelihood of that?
Well, you know, it's going to depend. So we're going to define the need, which has kind of been touched on through the planning process, right? And so through that need, we're going to identify potential alternatives. And depending on what those alternatives touch, you know, is it wetlands? Is it homes? Is it these other things that are protected? So it's those other processes that might drive it past a year. So without being able to project the future and which alternatives we're going to be looking at, it's hard to answer. Ideally, if we didn't impact any protectable resources, it could be really quick. But given the complexity that we all know that occurs on the west side of the valley, I'd be hard to, I don't want to give you that. Yeah.
So
Hey, Ron, so we've got to talk into the microphone, so I will pass the microphone.
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
So if a route, there's 2 routes, let's say, that look pretty good. One of them affects some wetlands, and the other route just wouldn't. So if you looked at the other route, you wouldn't have to delay the study for a year to study the wetlands. If the costs were a little more for the other route, but could avoid the study for the wetlands, is that the kind of thing you would do, or we're just going to have to see if we can get it through the wetlands?
No, that's not what we're doing. We're going to look at what the transportation need is, right? And so we're going to try to understand that. Right? What does that mean for Main Street? What does that mean for the other routes? And based on that, what are the alternatives that are going to help alleviate that need that we've identified? And so it's a little pre-decisional at this point to decide whether or not there's going to be wetlands or whether or not there's going to be homes. It's just too soon to understand. This process needs to be very process-driven. It needs to be transparent. Everyone needs to understand what the need is, understand what our objectives are, and then understand why we're looking at the things we're looking at in terms of solutions. So it's, in my mind, it's just too soon to make that speculation.
What do you do about intervening major things, the elephant in the room maybe? If somebody plants a school on the otherwise preferred route, when does that then, I mean, you're not going to tear that down, I guess. So the economic and those kind of things, the freight train's going down. If one of those get in the way, you have to turn the freight trains in.
We got to react to what the planning on the local government level is going to be and what their goals are. And if they have a scheduled or planned development, we need to take that into consideration. And it needs to affect the analysis and what we do with that information. But again, it's kind of pre-decisional. We're going to have to take that information in as it comes.
Mr. Weston? Mr. Weston?
Please don't call me that. My name's Brandon.
Because the Heber City is redoing our master plan update, and we have pending annexations, we have flux perhaps in density that can affect, of course, the bypass and Main Street.
Yeah.
How will that affect the timing of the environmental study process, and at what point, how far do you project out based on the maybes of density and the maybes of development versus those that are approved? How far do you go out? And how does our master plan update affect your scope and your definition of the need?
That seems like a really good question. Don't hand that microphone back. I want you to ask me that one more time so I understand the question.
Because we're updating our master plan
Yep.
in Heber City,
Okay.
and certainly things have been approved, right? Different developments have been approved, some
Yeah.
are pending, some annexations are pending,
Okay.
some developments are pending, right?
Yeah.
How much will you wait, or how far out will you go with the maybes of development?
Yeah.
You know, the maybes, and okay, it could be this, it could be that, it may
Right.
be within 5 years. How far out will you go in determining or defining your need in this first part of the environmental study?
Okay, that's a really good question and a complicated one. But the short answer is our planning horizon is 2050. But there are opportunities as we go along to do what's called sensitivity analysis. So we can look at, if this land use doesn't develop as it's planned, or it does develop as it's desired but not necessarily planned, we can take a look from a traffic model perspective on how that will change things. So it's hard to answer your question, but I think there are those opportunities that if we want to look at those what ifs, as it were, there's that chance during the environmental process just to see if we're where we are, given that how sensitive is our roadway network to these planned land use changes, right? And so we'll have the opportunity to kind of look at that, and land use, especially future land use, is super hard to project. Is it going to be a school? Is it going to be a church? Is it going to be a residential development? I think, or a park. Yeah, thank you. So I think we'll have those opportunities to take a look at those things, but it's, you got to, at some point, you've got to stop planning,
Right.
and you've got to move into construction, right? And that's kind of where we are as,
You made it.
I finally got here. Sorry about that.
That's why you were waiting over in your chair.
I was over at
See if you were
the
here.
assisted living center just a few minutes ago. But, so we will have those opportunities, but at some point we've got to stop speculating, right? Because we've got to move forward. And so this is kind of that hard line between planning and doing. And so we will have those opportunities to do those sensitivity checks to see if there's something that we've missed or that we should think about more.
Thank you. So I have a question about the purpose and need of that portion. Has that already been determined?
No.
Okay.
No, I think what we've got through the planning study is kind of an idea of what the need is. So the planning study did a good job of doing traffic counts and desires from the city, and they've got some input from the public. So we've got a good idea of what the need might be, and that's going to be open for public comment as well. And so what we'll move into is try to solidify that need, get some comment on it, and then move into the purpose. And so the purpose of our action or potential action is going to be to solve that need as it's brought up and clarified. And so no, it's not solidified at all.
So I understand, from what I understand you're telling me is that, or telling all of us, is that this study is going to look at the whole valley. It's looking to solve a traffic problem, not just look at one specific need, right? Like taking trucks off of Main Street, because the study really focused on that.
It did.
And so what you're saying is this environmental study is going to be more broad than that.
It's going to be more broad than that. That's right. We're going to take a look at what the actual need is. And the need is one thing, and the public and the community's desire is another thing, but those things need to be meshed. Like one thing doesn't necessarily trump the other, but it needs to be very fact-driven, this process. And so what are we trying to accomplish? And I think we all want to be on the same page as we move forward, and that's going to help us screen alternatives. That's going to help us, drill down on what we want to do. And don't forget, the answer could be we want to do nothing. That's on the page. So,
Can I ask one more question?
sure.
Do you have a rubric or criteria or ranking of all the environmental factors and which one outweighs another, or if the social comments outweigh certain environmental factors? And how do you screen it down, like you just said?
Yeah.
Can we see that kind of a rubric or ranking?
Well, I wish you could, and if you could create one, I would love to see it. But so what we've got, especially on the west side of Heber Valley, knowing it like we do, a lot of wetlands out there, right? And there could be some archaeological resources out there that we're not aware of, whether it's from the pioneers or the Native Americans or whatever. And then there's public comment on how the public wants to see their community develop and what they want to see for their future. And, a multitude of other things. To think that any one of those things, I need another word for Trump. I wouldn't listen. It's just so polarizing. To think that any one of those things dominate the other, it's really tough. Because there's some federal law around the Clean Water Act. There's federal law about the Antiquities Act. And then there's also just, reasonable judgment on people's lives and their homes, right? So we're going to have to, it's going to boil down to purpose and need. Like, what is our need and how do we accomplish it? And what are the things that we can do to accomplish it, and what are the impacts from those, and how do they weigh against each other? But reality is, it's not scalable. There's some federal law, there's community opinion, and the other things. So it's kind of tough when we get there, but I kind of think that's where we're headed.
Brandon, could we go through each one of the phases a little bit more? Because I think that may help identify or answer some of our questions before we ask them. And I think that will help illuminate the whole process.
Okay, sure. So at this point, I think we've got this project identified as an EIS, an environment. environmental impact statement, just because it seems like we're going to be dealing with some big issues. We're going to be dealing with maybe wetlands, home displacements, other things. And so what that means is,
There's a restroom just in a water container you can
yeah,
throw
I
that.
found that. So what we'll do is we'll enter into a formal scoping process, and that's going to happen after we publish a notice of intent in the Federal Register. And so we'll enter into what's called scoping, and that's generally 30 days. And so we'll have a scoping meeting that will include the public and also the regulatory agencies. And sometimes those are a combined meeting and sometimes they're separate, depending on the complexity of the issues. And so sorry.
So is this absolutely the NEPA process, or is that just kind of is the NEPA process the kind of guide construction, but then the state process is somewhat different?
This is the NEPA process.
It is.
This is the federal NEPA process, yeah.
And is the NEPA process, does that trump everything? Do we must follow the NEPA process?
That's the overriding process.
Okay, that's overriding.
So that's what we need to comply with.
Okay.
Just for two reasons. I mean, we might have federal funding for this project if it becomes a project, and also given the potential for the wetland impacts, it just makes sense to go through the federal process. And so it's very structured. And so we'll go into the notice of intent will be issued in the Federal Register. We'll have a scoping meeting, and we might have two. We might have a public scoping meeting, and we might have an agency scoping meeting that kind of overlap in terms of time frame. And that's the time that we get input from the public, that they can tell us what their thoughts are. At that time, we generally have enough information that we can relay to them that here's what we perceive the potential needs to be, right? And so they'll have that opportunity to come to us and say, you're wrong, or you're right, or here's what I think. And so we'll take that input and we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll develop some potential alternatives, right? And so we'll come back with those for public comment before a draft, I guess. And then, go ahead.
On the identification stage here, where we have scoping and purpose and need, are these run completely in parallel or partially in parallel, or are some milestones before the others, or precedent, like scoping and processing needs? Do those two processes happen parallel?
The scoping and process of need is generally pretty close, because we want to tell you what we think before you come in, just so you can have something to react to, you know, as a public. So here's what we think based on the data. Here's what it's looking like. What's your reaction to that? What would you do if it was your decision? And so take that information, and that helps refine the alternatives and those kind of things. So that's the intent of the scoping meeting. And that helps inform the alternatives process, you know, based on that information.